Hello, everybody. We're going to kick off this session on end-to-end integrity across the voluntary carbon market. Welcome all. Lovely to see a couple of faces that I recognize. Excuse me. Got a wonderful panel to explore what integrity means and what it means particularly in the voluntary carbon market. So thank you for joining. I'm Jonathan Shopley from Climate Impact Partners, also involved with IETA and DECROA. So I think given that we start a little bit late, I'm just not going to mess around. I'm going to suggest that what we do is we ask our panel to introduce themselves and what you do and how that connects to integrity in the voluntary carbon market and what you make of integrity. How do you interpret that in terms of your entities and the work that you do? So Edith, you've got integrity in the name of your company, and then of course, Mark, you do too in that. And then we'll just go down the panel actually. So would you like to kick us off?
Sure.
You're going to have to introduce yourself and your company and then pick up those two other questions.
Sure, happy to. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. So my name is Edith Kiss. I'm co-founder and Chief Commercial Officer at Integrity Global Partners. Very pleasure to be here discussing about this very important topic, which is at the heart of our mission, as you can figure from our name. So we are a relatively new mission-driven company, for profit, but with a mission to unlock capital and help scale the nature-based solution space, so exclusively focusing on the nature-based segment of the market, and also looking while unlocking capital and bringing the institutional capital, how we can raise the bar on integrity, which is obviously critical for the investors to have confidence in the market. So as I mentioned, we focus on the nature-based solutions segment, and we think that coming also from the broader experience in the carbon market, that this is a very special segment. So I think it's also like when you talk about the voluntary carbon market, it includes everything, right? All different sectors. And again, we think that nature deserves and needs a special attention because it's living carbon. It's not dead carbon, right? It's not infrastructure. It's not like other industrial areas. So often what might have gone well and where we're trying to learn from other sectors, I think might go wrong in nature. That's why for us, integrity is really related to that, and we're focusing on that. Where we, as a business, focusing is the early stage funding app, where we want to unlock the capital and bring in institutional financing, which one of the biggest barriers still is the lack of high quality investable supply. So there is this big gap at the very early, and it's linked to the fact that at the early stage the market is very constrained and there is no capital available. And again, coming to the nature-based space compared to energy or other sectors, I think what we see is there's a really big barrier to entry because it's so complex. You need to have GIS, remote sensing experts, technical experts, community knowledge. So I think where we see the integrity piece is really at this early stage part, because if you don't have money there, you might make compromise, and that's where it goes wrong on technical design or the community consultations and your long-term vision of the theory of change. So you really need to have that capital, and if you don't have capital, you also might compromise and take opportunistic capital, and that's what also we have seen in space, that this market really started from development angle, right? So NGOs, grant, donor finance, because of its very nature, as I mentioned, where we need to really focus on how do we bring in now private capital, but the institutionals are not ready yet because they can't go so early upstream. And again, what happened is what came in is what we call like opportunistic capital, and sometimes compromises the financial structuring, the benefit share, and if it's compromised early on, it's very difficult. So for us, again, when integrity means a lot of things, it's not just the supply side, demand side, technical aspects. I can go through if we have time. We have our own high integrity framework on a principle basis, which builds on all the good work of the ICVCM and VCMI and all the other actors. But it really focuses on the financial transparency, structuring, and all that middle piece, which we think is inevitable if we want to go to scale. So I'll leave that there, and happy to answer more questions.
So, I mean, you've raised one thing that I think we've got to get back to, which is how much does integrity cost? But you've given your own sort of definition. Mark, you've been quality and integrity ever since I've known you in the early 2000s. But you're with VCMI now. Of course, that's got integrity in its name. What do you guys make of it?
So thank you, Jonathan. And I'd like to apologise to everyone that I will have to leave at 3 o'clock on the dot. So if I just walk out, it's not because of anything any of you have said. Integrity in the carbon market has, I would say, probably 4, 5 or 6 different elements. There is the integrity on the supply side as we know it. And this is the work of the Integrity Council for the Voluntary Carbon Market, setting clear criteria for what constitutes a high integrity or high quality credit. And they're all the things that everybody who's been in this room any time this week will know, the additionality and permanence and non-leakage and robust quantification, etc. But there's also another bit of the supply side, and this is one of the 2 things that VCMI does, is that host communities, think about how carbon markets, whether they be voluntary or otherwise, and the carbon finance they generate, support transformational change on the road to net zero. It's quite easy, and we've seen, sadly, a number of countries who perhaps treat carbon credits like just another tropical soft commodity, competing on the basis of price, reducing environmental standards, reducing labour standards. That's not what carbon finance should be. So we work through our access strategies work, and my colleague George, who is not paying attention, but he's got his hand up, he leads our access strategies work, and we've worked with regional governments like Yucatan, national governments like Kenya and Ghana, but also, anyone's interested, talking at 4:30 this afternoon, working at sectoral level with agricultural ministers across Latin America to look at how carbon finance can leverage broader change. So not just how do you get a few bob out of a carbon credit, but how do you leverage additional capital? How do you feed that into a broader strategy? That was the second prong. The third prong would be the demand side, and that's the other piece that VCMI works on, to ensure that use of carbon credits not only doesn't just substitute for real action at source by a company, but as a way of galvanizing and perhaps accelerating that. So how do we get major investment in carbon credits as a way of driving further corporate ambition? And then we've published a claims code of practice which aims to do precisely that. And then there are some other elements that Edith has already mentioned. So, for example, market integrity. Does the system have integrity? Do we know where the money's going? Do we doing proper KYC and all the typical things in financial markets? And we could go on. But so several different complementary elements of the market, financial integrity, supply, etc., etc. All of those come together to what I think many of us would say. We've got a market that has floundered a bit recently. It's not reached its full potential. It's not a substitute for good policy, but it can bridge a really important gap. But it's not going to grow unless it's trusted, and integrity is the underpinning of that trust, and that in turn will drive scale. So that's my answer. I'm not going to tell you how much it costs till later.
Okay, great. Dinesh, why don't we turn to you? You're a key player in terms of certainly the transparency piece with the Climate Action Data Trust, but let's hear your interpretation of integrity from your perspective.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I think the kind of definition which Mark put, I think it encompasses everything, but I would say I'm just adding the digital infrastructure to that part of it. So CATREST, is, as you all know, it links, aggregates, and harmonizes the carbon markets data across the independent standards and the national registries alike.
Can we turn the volume up a bit, please?
Maybe I didn't
Guys
have
at the back can't hear. Or
Yeah,
maybe
the-
you just need to speak up a bit.
No, maybe I didn't have my lunch. Yeah, yeah. So the CATREST links, harmonizes, and aggregates the carbon markets across the independent standards and the National Carbon Registry. As we speak, we have independent standards and one country, Bhutan, already connected to the CATREST. And the way forward is to really see how the transparency and the high integrity towards increasing the confidence in the carbon market is going to work out by seeing the data surfacing from different forms of carbon standards and programs. Definitely there is a cost to it, but that's definitely a piece in terms of how you define in terms of whether it comes from the way you invest and see the benefits from the community perspective. I take a bit far from what Mark said in terms of I realize the integrity being well defined if the last mile, the community tries to understand and shouts that yes, I have received the benefits and I'm receiving it on a continuous basis, on a sustained basis, and I would like to support this wherever I go. I think I would see that as an end goal in terms of how you find to achieve what is integrity. It is not quantified, it is not qualified. I think it's more realized and then felt. So therefore, I don't think we will enter into that game of having 200 parameters to define integrity and then start debating around it and negotiate and have an agreed electronic format for integrity. I don't believe in that as an individual, but of course we have a system where we move forward, and I, leading the Climate Action Data Trust, would like to leverage definitely the digital infrastructure to showcase that certain direction in terms of the data that goes either to the ratings or to the exchanges or to the policymakers or to the Article 6 negotiating parties. I think it's more a kind of a common goal that we are trying to achieve, but it looks like a kind of a differentiated responsibilities. So that's where I would like to conclude my definition.
Thanks, Dinesh. Thank you. So Duncan, we were just saying, we met a couple of years ago when you were still at Shell, and Shell had put a couple of $100 million aside to work in this market. And when we met, you sort of said, how do you scale this market and how do you deal with quality and integrity? In fact, I asked you, I thought, what was the biggest challenge? And you said quality and integrity were the biggest challenges in terms of scaling. So now you're with Calix, and so let's hear how Calix connects with us.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. And that feels like a long time ago. But actually, building on that, I really like the way the ICVCM puts it, which is build integrity and scale will follow. Same vein. For those of you who don't know Calix Global, we're a platform with ratings and insights for the voluntary carbon market. So we provide ratings for about 500 different projects all across the globe and 17 different project types. But in terms of definitions, and I think Mark, you did a good job in just highlighting what are the key dimensions that people typically think of around integrity. I'd simplify it and say, look, it's providing confidence. It's the ability to have confidence that the claims made by carbon credits are real. And we look at 3 different types of claims. Obviously, every carbon credit ultimately claims to stand for a ton of removed or reduced emissions. And especially if you're going to use that credit in the context of an offset, you better be very confident that that claim is true, because what you're offsetting is for darn sure going to be 1 ton. And so that's sometimes, I think, a perspective that people lose, is saying, look, I'm using this as an offset, and I'm super sure that that ton of CO2 or its equivalent that I'm offsetting is real, so you better be as sure of the counterbalancing instrument. But we also look at integrity from an SDG claim perspective. Yeah, as you know, carbon credits often make claims around having impact on 1 or more of the UN SDGs. And I think there too there is a need to be a bit more precise in saying, yes, the evidence is there that this particular project does have an impact on SDG 4, quality education, or any of the other ones. I think there's a third dimension. I think that's gotten a lot more attention of late, which is integrity around environmental and social safeguards. And we've been doing a lot of work, and we'll be launching an additional dimension of assessment around how strong is a carbon project with regard to the barriers it has put in place around safeguards, because I think that's a crucial dimension in this debate. And I'll just say, before we ramp up and hopefully get some great questions, I am going to be leaving COP with a healthy amount of enthusiasm and optimism. I think the mood music here is one of, hey, let's fix some of the things that have been ailing this market, so that we can move on and make things grow again. And I just say, number one, I think that's super good news, and I think it's great. I just say one warning sign is saying, I think reset and restart is something different from forget and move on. Yeah. So the hard work of that reboot, that reinvigoration, needs to be done, and it's going to be a bit of hard work. It's not just about, we had a tough year, but next year will be better. No, this is about reset and reboot. So that my opening thought, Jonathan.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I wonder if is there a slide that you had that you could just flick up? Because as I was listening to you, there's a rubric that I've sort of seen that and if you, that's very simple, which is quality, integrity, and impact. And you don't, quality, integrity, and ambition. Sorry about that, Mark. I think it had integrity on your forehead, actually. So, clearly what I've heard from the opening statements is there really is an ambition to put markets to work. Quality is in the instruments, as we see it. There's a build to this slide, by the way, just if you could hit that a couple of times. There are a variety of initiatives that are driving that, and I've heard, and each one of you sort of fit into those. So quality, there's ISO, there's the ICVCM, in my view, with the CCPs, there's the CRO code, and Edith, I'm going to ask you to say a bit more about that. And then the rating agencies that are taking a view. On the integrity, the VCMI claim, this is how you use these quality instruments. The SBTI's guidance, Climate Action Data Trust, taking care of double counting, transparency, and data free at the source of access, I think. The EU Consumer Protection Initiative, and then UN Net Zero Recognition and Accountability Framework. So there's a whole range of organizations that are defining quality and integrity. And ambition, of course, is what we're getting out of here. And we're going to be measuring that in terms of what the negotiated response will be to the global stocktake, whether we operationalize Article 6, compliance market, etc. So for me, that's kind of the landscape, and we can get rid of this slide now. Thanks, and Mark, you can get back in. But one of the things that struck me as I was thinking about this panel, I was reminded of Churchill's statement. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. And you could translate that into our market and say, never in the history of human environmental endeavor has so much attention been paid by so many focused on a market so small. So that takes me to the first question, which is, are we overdoing this? There is what is necessary, driven by ambition, and then there's what's pragmatic. And I mentioned something about cost, and I just wonder whether, how cost effectively we are addressing an issue at the early stage of this, or particularly the voluntary carbon market. And maybe you feel it's entirely appropriate to pile in now. Maybe you don't. But could we just do a quick rundown, the panel again, maybe Duncan starting with you on this occasion, and just say, how do we feel about this in the market? And I'm glad we're starting with you, because your comments about don't leave the past, build on it, make sure there's continuous improvement. So is this just part of a continuous improvement, or are we actually dragging this thing down?
I don't think there is any attempt from most parties to drag this down. I think there's a lot of goodwill to try and see global carbon markets at scale having real impact. I think there is an element of a philosophical belief and an evidence-based belief that in a market that ultimately depends on trust, it's the ultimate trust-based market that we're talking about here, because you can't give somebody a bag of CO2 and say, hey, this one's yours. And so if you can't trust the underlying, how can you ever get to scale? And so it's going to require effort, but I think it's a precondition. If we want that scale, we almost want this, we're stuck in not a dilemma, not a trilemma, we're almost in this quadrilemma. We want it all. We want scale for good reasons, because the planet and people need it. We want it now. We want integrity, and we've spoken about what that means. And we want it cheap. Now that's a pretty difficult quadrilemma.
Yeah.
But I'm fundamentally of the belief that it is possible, and we see this across our own ratings universe. As I said, we've rated close to 500 projects now. There are some really great ones out there. We have, our rating scale goes from A to E. We have about 40 A-rated projects in those 500, and you can say, hey, that's little, but I say, hey, there are some really great projects in there. We have about 80 B-rated projects, and the rest is lower down on the scale. And there's some amazing projects, not always in the areas that you would expect them the most, but we have great nature-based projects with some Car Mexico projects that recently got A-rated. We have some amazing landfill gas projects, industrial gas destruction projects, some AR projects. So if it can be done, then shouldn't it be done?
Sure. Let's go to Dinesh.
I have a completely different viewpoint here, maybe a bit controversial too, yes? Yeah. How many of you believe a ton is a ton is a ton? Raise your hands.
Did you get the question?
A ton of cheese.
No, of the emission reductions, right? So we have started already coloring the carbon credits from the CER's days, right? Thanks to Mark, he invented gold standard as well. In the sense of understanding the market, that only the compliance market has the highest integrity versus voluntary doesn't have or may have or should have or shall have. I think that differentiation has already been sowed 20 years ago when the CERs was already colored, when the methodology started giving its different shapes, that HFC CERs have absolutely no environmental integrity, but still it existed. Then came the discussion in terms of CDM CERs have absolutely no integrity in the market and nobody should buy it. And today it is selling at 20 cents or 10 cents, or people are giving money and selling it as well, right? I don't think anybody is trying to pull down the voluntary carbon market, which has done an excellent service to the community, not because of the $36 billion that we saw as a resultant investment, but also to carry the costs with a lot of confidence that one day the compliance market would come back, and then there would be this bridge that would help them to build on, and then the kind of interplay and the convergence we are talking about. I think that's where I believe VCM is going to be the backbone of how to bridge towards the next level of the compliance market. And whether you like it or not, people are going to have more faith in the compliance market as compared to the voluntary, thanks to all the distractions that the market suffered for the last 24 months. Yeah. But I believe there is a lot of positivity in terms of how both ICVCM and VCM and other initiatives are trying to bridge it together.
Mark, you mentioned, so just as you pick up this issue, you mentioned something in your opening remarks about it's not a commodity, but you're also on the board of the ICVCM. I've always assumed that the ICVCM has used the voluntary carbon market as a runway to launch a deep, liquid, well-traded, commoditized market. It sounded to me like you might not share that view.
No, I think that may well be the end game. I don't think we're there at the moment. I think what you've talked about, a runway, is very important. And I'd make 3 points here. One is the market is not the objective. Emissions reductions and removals are the objective, along with the sustainable development benefits that Dinesh mentioned. So if I put it really bluntly, I don't care whether how the markets are, as long as they drive the impact. If there's a better way of driving impact, better way of channeling private sector finance to deep emissions reductions, removals, bring it on. At the moment, I don't see it. I see policies lagging, and I've said this many times before, it's 35 years since we started international negotiations on climate change. Every country should have economy-wide policies affecting every sector of its economy, and we aren't. So we need this to bridge a gap that is of our own making.
Yeah.
Second, we need to have integrity, because firstly we need to have something that we've talked about, the trust side, and it may cause additional costs because there'll be additional verification and validation and project development, but that should pay for itself because if people trust the market, buyers will come back. I mean, you know, as many others in this market know, that it's been a painful year or two, and we want buyers to come back in, and we want buyers to pay a higher price. And that serves the objectives I mentioned in terms of countries, but it also means that it acts as a price signal for companies to drive their own decarbonisation. So if we want to marry those two objectives of deep decarbonisation by companies and carbon finance, we can't do without integrity, because otherwise people will not trust it. So it may seem like an upfront cost. Think about, you can buy a dishwasher for 200 quid or 1,000 quid. You would hope that the 1,000 quid one's going to last for 20 years. It's going to cost you more up front, but it's going to wash better and it'll last longer, and with a bit of luck it'll be a bit more sustainable and more energy efficient. So you get what you pay for. And we want a high integrity market that people pay highly for to get high quality credits and drive deep reduction. So it's as simple and as complicated as that, really.
Edith, just want to make sure that, in that sort of alphabet soup of quality, integrity, and ambition initiatives that we showed a moment ago, and I don't know if you saw that, but ICRO was mentioned there, and I know you're on the advisory council of that. ICRO is an IETA initiative. I think, and I'm not going to ask you to say too much about ICRO per se, but when, Dinesh, you asked the question, is a ton a ton? And I think, I didn't see many hands going up, but essentially that was what the market was built on. I think now the issue is who judges whether a ton is a ton? Is it Kalex? You know, do you do ratings and then does that lead to discounting? And if we are going to make judgments around quality and integrity, who the hell is qualified to do that? And that's going to lead me on to a question about regulation, but do you mind picking up on that?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And I had lots of interesting points. I also wanted to come back to, before maybe to ICRA, a few points, and so we talked about costs and others. But I think I also would like to urge a bit on a caution of, again, on nature, when you put in the context of everything. And we have seen the challenges, right? It's much easier to give an A rating on technological or methane project, and that's why I think we need to be careful. We know that we're not going to get to 1.5 degrees without nature, and we know that the voluntary market has come back from the low levels based on the enthusiasm of corporates, how powerful it can be for nature-based solutions because of all the other, not co-benefits, but core benefits. As we know, we have a biodiversity crisis as well. So I would urge on that a little bit on what you said, and I agree a ton has to be a ton, but as far as I'm concerned, and as we view it, it has to be aligned with the best available science, and it's going to evolve. Whatever you tell me now, it might not be anyway in 10 years the same ton. And put more complexity on top of it, even the footprint of companies. I mean, somebody tell me what's the Scope 3 emission confidence on your Scope 3 footprint. So why do we beat up this market on 99.9% confidence when I think the point is more that the market has moved on, we have more science, we have more, you have AI and Web3 and all this capacity. So I think from our perspective, integrity is to be always aligned with the best practice. That's why we are a big fan of, the dynamic baseline or keeping up to date. We have to because that's integrity. But to stop the market moving because we can't compare a nature-based credit to a landfill gas credit, I think that's a massive mistake. So, and as far as compliance markets concerned, I mean, yes, CDM, and we have seen also that that's not the holy grail, and it might well be that nature is going to be left behind again of Article 6. So what then, right? So I think it's, again, I would caution a little bit around that. In terms of the price, I can tell you it's not $5 for sure. So that's the problem, right? Again, we're beating up the market when we were selling credits at $2 a ton. Why didn't you have this and that? And we have now the tools. We have seen it even a $15, $20, the power of the pricing. And I think at those levels, if you go back to the higher double-digit numbers, yes, you can put on the quantification methods, even on biodiversity baselines. We're talking about gender credits, even social impacts. You can start quantifying. All that has a cost. Audits, ESG, IFC. So I think we need to make sure that the market supports those.
Can I just make a comment that always worries me when we talk about carbon markets and then we say the price has to be higher. But in basic economics, a market finds its price where supply meets demand. So if you want to ask for higher prices, you've got to really ratchet up demand or ambition as we had it. But I always find it odd that in a community that really believes in carbon markets, we keep on saying the price needs to be higher. And I'm going to give you a right to reply, and then Mark.
I mean, I think the way I see it is a proxy for demand needs to be higher. I think it's no more nor less than that. But I think there's a couple of points that both Edith and Duncan have said, made, which I think is really important. We've had a last year where, as anyone who's been paying attention will notice, that projects are either perfect or they are a affront to humanity, and that's just not the reality of life, is it? I mean, as Edith said, if you look at the market 10 years ago, the technology that was being used, the knowledge that was being used, it's completely different. And there have been bad actors. There are in every single market, but there are a lot of really dedicated people who are trying to make this work. And I think trying to judge the credits of 10 years ago using our knowledge from now makes no sense. There will always be projects that underperform and overperform as any project outside the carbon market. I mean, if all projects perform perfectly, risk management will be out of business. So we know that that's the problem. The challenge arises not because the projects themselves underperform or overperform, but because of the claims that are made on the demand side about it. And that's where the ratings can be really important. Sophisticated financial markets will say, okay, this is probably 80% likely to be a ton, so you better buy 1.25 of them to offset your ton. And then we can get a bit smarter about this, and it'll be a bit of trial and error, and we'll get there, and it won't always be perfect, and you probably build in a bit of margin for error. And going back to 26 years ago, when the Kyoto Protocol was signed, those of you who were there will remember that it said industrial countries will reduce their emissions over the next 11 to 15 years by 5.2%. And the first comment was by a scientist, plus or minus 25% for the margin of error. So, things haven't changed that much.
Thank you. Okay, Duncan, Edith, do you want to respond directly to that?
No, I can come back to the regulation.
Okay, then let's give Duncan.
So Edith, you and I sat on our first panel together about 5 years ago. So we can handle a bit of pushback back and forth. So I didn't hear anybody here, and we haven't yet heard from the audience, beating up the market today. And those were the words you were using. And so it's interesting. I think we all need to start looking forward and saying, hey, how are we gonna learn from what we've learned and move on? But first, just data-wise, and I agree, nature is oh so important for the planet. But data-wise, we see A-rated nature projects. We also are really encouraged by what Vera is doing with the new consolidated RED methodology. In some ways, I've heard many people say perhaps a bit overdue, but let's look at the positive side. It's here. And we're hopeful that coming out of that will be some higher integrity RED projects. But already today, we see some A-rated IFM projects. We see some B-rated blue carbon and AR projects. So I'll repeat what I said before. Isn't it a case of if we can, we must?
So Edith,
let me just say one more thing to what you said, Jonathan. And you're right. Price is reflective of supply and demand. And I hear what you're saying. I believe the demand will come when integrity is there. I think integrity is a precondition for demand to come back. But there's also a supply side to what you said, Jonathan. And if you look at what's been submitted for CCP tagging, not every methodology has been submitted. And so there'll be actually a slug of supply that is actually not even being proposed. And the old RED methodologies are not being, so far at least, submitted for tagging. And if you then also make a crystal ball prediction of what might happen to ACM2, well then the market on the supply side will also look very different from what it looked like. And so, yes, demand will have an impact on price, but so will supply.
Yeah, so maybe just, Jenna, I fully agree with you, and I think we're at a really good point. Exactly, that's the message to investors. We know now how to do it. But just again, to put in context, there is 900 million ton oversupply in the market, of which I think 250 million, if I have the numbers right, from RED Plus projects that are on the market. And those, some of them might have been, junk, or there are some issues, but even if you apply ratings agencies, like discounting method, there is some oversupply. And my point was that that's legitimate credits that would be perfectly fine to use for historical emissions, for which anyway the confidence interval for calculating that was low. And I think when I meant beating up is meant that a little bit the market is down, right? So it has been at the forefront of criticism, and I think collectively just need to make sure that we're not throwing out the whole system just because we are moving on. And so I think, again, the narrative and all the criticism, it wasn't common for you that you have beaten up the market, but I think it's generally speaking, when we're trying to insist on the comparability and not recognizing the nature-related specificities, might be dangerous, might be also dangerous for that reason to just push it into a compliance market blindly, right? So that's why we need to have those differentiations.
I'm going to pick up something you said, which is, it'll be useful to hear from the audience. Thank you. You said we hadn't really opened up to the audience, and before we get into too many debates here and get deep into those, can I just ask for a show of hands if anybody ready to ask a question? Otherwise, I've got hundreds.
It's Saturday afternoon, but I think you have it in you.
Yes, please. And just down here.
Just to echo what Edith was saying, I think it's really interesting that we say that, oh, unless there's integrity, there's no obligation for companies to do anything, or unless there's integrity, then the demand won't come back, or unless there's integrity. And basically what we're doing is we're putting the onus on the carbon market, and everyone in the room, like, I agree, yes, let's aim for higher integrity. But I do think that the narrative of 1 ton must equal 1 ton, it must be perfect, it must be integrous, otherwise they're not worthy of being bought, is quite dangerous, because it creates this false expectation that it is possible to totally accurately measure the amount of carbon that's absorbed by a tree millions of miles from, like, it's crazy. And I think there are lots and lots of other examples in the world where we're happy with a bit of uncertainty. You know, I've said this many times, but when we merrily talk about the GDP of the US and the population of Nigeria, and all of these are estimates, right? Like, there's many other examples.
So do you have a specific question, or is that an observation? And by the way, I should have asked you to say who you are and and your affiliation.
Sorry, I'm Molly, and I'm head of carbon strategy for BAN.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
I guess my question is back to Dinesh. Do you think 1 ton is 1 ton, and do you think it's even desirable to frame the market in that terms?
No, my intention was the opposite. But having said that, I just wanted to know the way the ratings example was given, that if you have 100 carbon credits from a project already, and you apply the current ratings methodology and say that procure 150, you have achieved the high integrity. I personally don't buy that argument at all. We are not talking about the number game here. We are talking about the real integrity. And that's why I said it can't be quantified, it can't be qualified, it has to be felt, recognized, and should be on the ground. So that's why I also gave an example of HFCCERs in the CDM. Why we are moving to an argument towards, like, anything happening under Article 6.2 or 0.4 should be or will be always of high integrity, versus what has happened in VCM is not at all high integrity. Why we are even having that argument here? So that's why I asked that question. That is a misnomer, basically, and it's not a number game. And that's why I said it's going to be a long journey before we attain some kind of arrangement. And that's why I buy into your argument, for whatever reason. But it's going to be a kind of a evolution and discovery of how you really want to levelize that this is integrity. Let's stop that discussion and get into the market and do the right things for the community. I don't know how to define that in a roadmap, but these discussions will continue even after 10 years. You will discuss the same thing, because Article 6.2 and 6.4 would have gone into a different level. You would have forgotten voluntary market, because you're talking about a convergence already. We don't say that they should coexist, but they should talk to each other. So that's going to be a lot of interesting facts that is going to come and define integrity. But I would definitely not subscribe to an idea that you buy 200 from the same old project which has a lot of controversy, and then you compensate only for 50, and it is a high integrity project. Come on.
So can I just double check? Yes, I've got a question there. I don't want it to go too deep down until I've tapped into the questions. And there is a question. Can you raise your hand again? Yeah. Duncan, I will come back to you.
Hi, I'm Catalina from Go-To-Markets, and I wanted to ask a question regarding what you were saying about whether we can, should we judge a project that it's 10 years old with what we were right now, what the technologies are right now, and also related to the RED methodology. So on Monday, at the end of the afternoon, I forget the name of the panel, Vera was saying how now old RED projects are going to be reassessed, like that if we have vintages, let's say 2017, 2018, those projects, once the baseline is available, we could reassess all credits according to the new baseline. So, and of course that's for, we trade credits, you know, so for us is thinking of, okay, then what is going to happen with those old credits? Should then their price be increased? Because old credits tend to be cheaper than newer credits. So my question is, in your opinions, your organizations, in your personal opinion, should those credits be reassessed with the new baseline to be of the same price of a credit that is going to be issued with the new methodology, should we still consider them differently? So it's just a very interesting issue that I would love to know your opinion.
But
Mark, it looks like you're wrong.
Well, I think Duncan should answer the question about the changing quality of credit. But I think I just wanted to clarify what I was saying. I wasn't trying to say that credit from 2013 should automatically be assumed now to be the same value. It was rather, we shouldn't judge the people and the projects themselves by the standards today. Now that we have better technology, my opinion is we should reassess them. I should, for full disclosure, say that I'm a board member of Vera, and I do think it's important for the old projects to transition into the new methodology. They will have to, the project owners and developers will have to make that choice. My guess is rather like Duncan was saying, there may be multiple classes, seeing those who get CCPs and those that don't. But I mean, the point of the ICVCM and the CCPs is to drive quality and certainty around projects up. So I would encourage them to transition, and I think people should be using the best available technology that we have. So I just wanted to clarify that. I'm not saying, they're all fine, but rather that let's not go back in time and judge what we had then.
Yeah, just add to it. Yeah, I fully agree. I think the point is that we are in this transition, and this transition is not smooth, and that's why it's a bit turmoil. But absolutely, I think that's a solution, a tool from Vera, so that you can, if you have still available tons that you're sitting on and you can't sell them, you can retroactively then reduce it, and then you get a higher price, hopefully, because the point is that there will be the baseline, there will be less credits from it in the future.
So, Duncan, do you want to I'd like to pose a question, sort of get us back a little higher up. So, as we look at this, and we've talked about price, and we've talked about the cost of integrity, what we've never tested, and remember, ambition is at the top of that rubric, we've really not tested the appetite of corporates. We're talking about the private sector rather than governments here, being the voluntary carbon market, to absorb that kind of price hike on something that's voluntary, where it's getting really tough to make claims of high integrity, because the attention is on abatement. So there's an organisation that's already spending on abatement to meet a science-based, science-informed, necessary trajectory. So in my mind, I'm sort of curious as to whether the voluntary carbon market, from what I've heard, is almost like the first stage of a rocket going into space, and it's just lifted off, and now it's going to be jettisoned. And really where we're going is towards compliance. And Dinesh, that's what I heard you say, that, ultimately, if this turns out to be a higher priced market, the only way to really secure demand is to drive it through compliance rather than voluntary action. So just would like to get your reactions to that, and then I'm going to come back to the audience for questions. And remember that Mark's leaving in 5 minutes, so anything particularly for him, jump in.
Well, I think we should be moving. I mean, I think my comment earlier about it taking the 35 years to get a little way is very clear that I think we should be moving to compliance systems. I think there are different ways to do that. I hope that over the course of the rest of this decade, the rules of Article 6 and the voluntary carbon market will converge, so that then people can use credits for compliance purposes or for voluntary purposes, and there's not this one's better than that one. Mm-hmm. I hope that we learn a lot from the past, and that drives convergence. I think we need, on the voluntary part of the market, there are bits of the system that should be subject to regulation. The work that we do on the claims that companies can make, which are effectively advertising or marketing claims, should be covered by regulation, whether that be advertising standards or consumer protection standards, because after all, companies are going to make claims to market themselves or their products and services to the public. And just like my food or the dishwasher I referred to earlier, I want that to be covered by high quality regulation and something that protects. I mean, we're seeing advances in disclosure. I think you mentioned earlier about CFTC and the IOSCO and people like that. We're seeing regulation there, and that's absolutely right. Investors need to see how companies are performing, how they're managing risk and opportunity. So absolutely, yes. It's not, though, that it's going to be kind of one jump. Everything's going to be voluntary, and then suddenly there's going to be this compliance market, because we've seen that hasn't happened. And that's fine. But as long as we've got a clear direction of travel, and it means that the different bits of the system are all pushing broadly in the same direction. Yeah. I think that's absolutely right.
Mark, There is another question I wanted to ask you, actually, particularly because you spoke about, different regions, host countries, and, the breadth of the VCMI's focus. You and I were in Tokyo for the Asia Climate Summit. And what struck me there is that there was no reference to ICVC and VCI. Certainly in certain, more sort of US and European audiences, that's all we focus on. And it seemed to me that there was an entire region that was looking for a looser interpretation to sort of get into the tent. So in other words, in my mind, again, with another mental image, we are crowding people into a very small tent, a small number of people, and then asking them to jump quite high. And there might be regions of the world that already need, perhaps, or have a different perspective. So how would you view that?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I'm really glad you said Tokyo 6 weeks ago. I thought you were going to try and remind me of something in 2004, and I was going to
listen, I got
no chance. But, look, one of the things that VCMI has been doing, and we published 10 days ago a beta version of a claim that allows some flexibility for companies to use carbon credits to bridge the gap between where they are and where they should be on their Scope 3 emissions. I won't, it wouldn't be foolish of me to say it's without controversy, but I think it's to open a discussion and a debate for companies that are not there yet. We know that, for example, of companies with science-based targets, well over half are not on track to make their Scope 3 emissions. Now, the carbon credits shouldn't be, and this is the accusations of greenwashing in the past, shouldn't be okay, I'm not going to make any effort, I'll just buy some carbon credits. But I go back to what I said at the very beginning. How do we craft this market and create demand that both generates the carbon finance we need and helps drive ambition? And that's, going back to your point about price, that's where a higher price creates more of a signal internally. But one of the things, the purposes of that Scope 3 flexibility claim was to open a conversation about what do we do about all the companies that aren't those 4,000 to 6,000 that have signed up to SBTI. I mean, and let's be clear, SBTI has done exactly the right thing. It set a really clear pathway on how you get from here to where we need to get. But there are different ways of achieving it. And for many companies, we've talked to a lot of sort of hard to abate sectors in middle-income countries that say, scope who? With Scope 3? They're trying to, I mean, I'm caricaturing, but, struggling to get on that pathway. So how do we find a way to encourage them to raise their levels of ambition? Yeah. And how can carbon finance and carbon markets play a role in that to help drive that ambition? And I don't think the two are necessarily inimical. If we think about it we're smart about it. And I'm afraid on that note, I'm going to bid my fellow panelists farewell and you, and I'm going to have to scarper. So thank you for listening.
We're going to keep going, but thank you for that. It's not the end yet, guys. It's the end of Mark's ability to participate. That's really. So, any further questions from the floor? Yes, oh, sorry, of course, Pascal.
I have a question, Pascal Sylvain for Total Energies. Integrity is, there are always new aspects of integrity. And for instance, today's new aspect is about duration, especially for nature-based solutions. So how long it needs to be, let's say, the permanence. It seems to be a very high debate today at the COP, and people don't agree on that. So can you say a word on that?
Sorry, the question on...
The question is how to integrate also the aspect of durability or permanence in nature-based solution as an aspect of integrity, because it's a new aspect.
Yeah, sure. No, but that was my point, that it's you might never end up being able to compare it to those solutions, and that was the reason why in 1997 in Kyoto Protocol, right? We didn't have nature, we left it behind, and then we had the scientific papers that finally shed the light that without nature we're not going to go there, right? We have no chance to reach the Paris agreements without nature. So I think there are solutions, and it came from the CCS actually, right? We had also the carbon capture and storage, we have the buffer mechanisms, we have now again the monitoring costs are coming down, which even 5 years ago, it wouldn't have been possible for Vera to commit for 100 years of monitoring, right, because of the cost. So I think, again, we need to accept that nature is a living carbon, and I think we have solutions for that now sufficiently with the buffer mechanisms, and ultimately, from my perspective, and for definitely so for our perspective, and it might not be fully represented in the market, the reason why we're focusing on this natural capital aspects, which is much broader, carbon is a piece, is because we think that in a nature context, permanence will only be anyway achieved if it transfers the local economies. So you have multi-revenue approach, you have to have a holistic approach, and it's not about put a fence around and guard that fence for 100 years, and even then the forest will die at some point, right? That's the natural cycle. So I think from our perspective, it's a now question. We have 10, 15 years also to the flexibility. Yeah, we don't have time for hard to abate sectors in our perspective, and on the nature sector, the permanence is driven by your holistic approach and how you transform local economies, and you get then all the SDG benefits around it.
Duncan, you must be grappling with this, if you're looking at projects.
Yeah.
What's your view?
But let me because I can see a current running through a number of the questions that have been raised. I think it would be wrong and dangerous to frame this as a discussion or even an opposition between crystalline perfection and utter junk, as if there wasn't a continuum. I think that's a wrong framing of this debate, because I don't think there is an expectation that crystalline perfection is there. Yeah, and so nobody, I think, is chasing, is it 1.0 tons or 1.0001 tons or 0.9. I think that debate isn't around. I don't think anybody's looking for perfection. I think people are looking for higher confidence that when a credit claims to represent 1 ton, that you can have a fairly high likelihood to say, hey, yes, that claim is something you can make with confidence. So I think it's not a healthy thing to say, hey, it's the battle of perfection versus the good. I don't think that's what this conversation is about. Permanence, just to react on that, I think there's this opportunity to build on what we've learned over the last 20, 30 years of doing these projects. I'm encouraged by what Vera announced around the LTMS, the long-term monitoring scheme or system that they are rolling out. I'm encouraged by initiatives like some of the methodologies or protocols that CAR has been rolling out, where they are actually looking for 100-year monitoring commitment overall. And there are projects that are being verified using those protocols. And so, again, if it can be done, it probably should be done.
Thank you. Look, one of the things that I notice about the panel as we had it is private sector. You've got CAD Trust, VCMI, ICVCM, pretty much stakeholder driven. CAD Trust, sort of World Bank, it's a sort of non-profit effort, and then we've got Calyx, which is making a judgment, valuable judgments in the market. And it's been mentioned that IOSCO and CFTC, ASA, a variety of regulatory organizations are beginning to sort of come into the market as well. And you've probably heard that the EU is thinking about, much stricter regulation over the market. So what do you as the panel feel about this? Is this a market that is benefiting from that kind of increased regulation over disclosures, claims, the operation, the integrity of the use of units and the quality of those units? Or do you think that could be something of a sea anchor, yet another cost, another barrier that sort of curtails the market? Edith, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure, happy to. No, I absolutely think that it's essential because, again, this market started as a totally voluntary, bottom-up, self-regulated industry, and it's normal that it becomes a bit of a wild, wild west. And other markets, financial markets, commodities, you have regulation, and I think we need in terms of what I mentioned, more like the financial transparency piece and the structuring, and that needs to be, there should be much more regulation of at least disclosure and transparency, and I think that's one of the pieces of the integrity for me, which is not even been discovered by the journalists yet. So,
Okay, Dinesh.
There's no change in the view, but only for one perspective, which I mentioned, that the regulations are here to give the certainty to the market. I think that's the sole objective of them, to make this happen. And where do they learn? They learn from both the compliance and the voluntary carbon market in the past. They're not bringing anything up from the sky. So I think it's more towards an integrated approach, largely from the regulated perspective, that the market has a certainty and behaves the way any regulated market should behave. I will be very much surprised and pleasantly surprised if they get into the question of integrity, getting into the question of quality, and then give some regulations for the commodity to be traded on the exchange. It will be the 12th or the 14th wonder in my life. I'm not sure. I'm not belittling their efforts, but it's more towards what is the fundamental objective of these regulatory bodies to come together and then go forward to develop such an instrument, is to put at par with other assets in the market. Do we equally discuss all these aspects in other products? Can we question that, or should we be a part of that solution? I think that is one aspect of looking at this viewpoint. The second, I come back to the ratings. When I was leading the ratings agency way back, it was too far away, 20 years ago. The rating was given only to the probability of issuance of the carbon credits, nothing else. Because sustainable development benefits were the prerogative of the country, the host country, not the acquiring country. And they decide what was SD benefits, and they gave the host country approval. The buyers bought it, whether it was a broker or it was a country. They bought it and they retired it as well. Though the volume could be different, the percentage of retirement could be different. So therefore, now, with a bottom-up approach, again the host country is going to decide what is sustainable development benefits. And do we question that? That's why I said the host country, under the compliance market, is going to sell the first 8 modes, which is already done in the market already by Thailand, Ghana, and other countries. They have decided what is SD benefits. Down 10 years, are you going to question them about the quality or integrity? I think today you have to be very careful about that part. And that's where the regulatory body should pick it up and then say, I'm not defining an asset only for the financial stability of the market. I'm also equally concerned on the quality and the other related aspects.
Interesting. Duncan, do you want to comment on that?
I've limited to add. I agree. I think it's something the market should embrace.
Okay. Questions? Thank you.
Hello, thank you so much for this informative...
We can't really hear.
Is it on?
It is on.
Okay.
Right.
My name is Paris from Perspectives Climate Group, and I'm actually really pleased that you asked that last question. So my question is more on the social integrity, right? So I feel like we're really focusing on the financial and all this. I mean, I'm not belittling it, but my question is, countries are now taking benefit sharing way more seriously, with Kenya, for example, saying 25% of all proceeds should go back to the community. So what is, and also that is part of the regulatory frameworks for countries that is also touching upon the voluntary carbon markets, right? Because all project developers have to give, X amount back to the community. So what is, your organizations doing to kind of reinforce social integrity, and how are you making it more like a debate that can be had? Yeah.
Okay.
I'm happy to start. I think that as I mentioned at the beginning, for us, and again, you have to probably differentiate between different, because I know this is broadly the voluntary market, but a nature base is the core, right? So as I mentioned, these are living projects. This is nature projects, are social projects. So I think when we talk about benefit sharing and the financial structuring, this is exactly what we mean, that we want to make sure there's fair share of revenues. And actually, again, the way we think about it, the communities often this shouldn't be an afterthought how much benefit you're going to share after. You have to do the design. They are at the core of the project, participatory design and all that. So when I use the word financial integrity, that's for us is to make sure that the project is built on a solid legs. And then the governments are a really key piece, and that's something that we discussed in another panel, is that the voluntary market again started because it was voluntary in the shadows of governments, because the Kyoto Protocol collapsed and there was nothing to, nobody talked to. But right now, what is really key for these nature-based projects and other projects as well under Article 6 is go back to the governments, right? You have to consult them, you have to get a letter of approval, they have to be in. And what we're seeing right now, all these carbon regulations popping up is a kind of a reaction to the fact that it didn't happen in the past years. And I think what we on our side believe that if you do it well, if you design this project and from the beginning you engage with the government, and it's the same for corresponding adjustments, which is very scary, the way that the market is pushing governments to give them the letters without the governments having the time to take an informed decision about them, right? Same thing as it happens with the communities on their contracts. I think that we hope that by that inclusive design with communities, governments, you will actually help them to think through, because if they take a too far-fetched view, then they will deter investments. That's also a lose-lose. So how do we come to those synergies? And I think very encouraged by that now the market is changing, and this helps again with the Paris Agreement, and the whole infrastructure is building, and we really just need to build every single project in an inclusive manner.
Yeah, just two added cents. Thanks so much for asking the question, because I think you're absolutely right. I think more attention needs to be paid to safeguards, environmental and social safeguards by projects. I'm encouraged to hear that VCS in VCS 4.0 and 5.0 will actually ask more of projects in that arena, and also wouldn't be surprised to see changes in SD Vista and CCB. And us as a ratings agency, it's something we have been working on for the past year and a half. We'll be talking about that a bit more in the weeks and months to come. But assessing what projects are doing around environmental and social safeguards, I think, is absolutely a key piece of that holistic view that includes greenhouse gas integrity, as well as sustainable development goal impact and environmental and social safeguards.
Dinesh, do you want to add anything at this stage? Because then I know we're running up against time, but we have some minutes. Any further questions from the floor? So I have one, and that is, what we've heard is the alphabet soup, as I mentioned. There's the ICVCM and the VCMI. There are now regulatory bodies coming in, taking their view. We also saw here at COP, just before COP, the 6 leading voluntary carbon standards committing to a set of principles. We saw and I hope I'm going to get this right, VCMI, ICVCM, SBT, CDP, have I got them? All sort of came out and said, we are looking to create this end-to-end integrity in the market. So the question I have is that good? Is that helping? Is that enough coordination? Too much? One of the things that's made the voluntary carbon market really valuable is we've let thousands of flowers bloom, and only a few make it in to sort of the next phase. So there's the innovation piece that I don't think will ever go away. As soon as we've got a commoditized market, we need things that we can trust. We need sort of an exploratory area. So my question is that coordination enough amongst the right organizations, or is it too much perhaps, and might stifle some of the innovation that we still need to see? Over to you. Anyone to start?
Shall I just quickly? I think definitely it was quite scary to look at that chart with all that initiatives. I think we definitely need more consolidation, more harmonization. And what we're hearing indeed from buyers and investors is just they don't know what's going on. Like there's so much going on, and you haven't even put it TNFD, TCFD, all the others for investors. So I think, and coming back to maybe Mark's points, like we really need to, I think, on the demand side, obviously, because it's a voluntary carbon market. So I think that's where I see a bit of a risk, that we have too many initiatives and we need to have clear direction. As we said, flexibility is key. Any compliance market started oversupplied and with gradually bringing. So we need to, if we want to have really high targets, far-fetched, we need to have that flexibility. So I think on the demand side, I think we need more. We would like to see more in terms of more incentives and clarity. And on the supply side, I think we have now hopefully what we need to know. We need a bit more regulation and some of the actors, and again regulating the actors, not just the quality and and the technical parts, but consolidation is key because we need to focus on the work, not just on the reporting.
I just compliment what Edith said. I think it's good that there's more alignment. I think people like not being confused, and alignment and initiatives, or work to align these initiatives will help that and will be healthy for the market. But at the same time, to answer your question, is it too much? If this really is going to be a market of tens of billions of dollars, which, if it's high integrity, would mean a lot of impact, well, then show me a mature market of that size that doesn't have a combination of regulation and industry groupings and initiatives. So I think that's par for the course.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I can't be different, right? I have to agree to that. But largely to the reason is that, again, the differentiation we have brought in between voluntary and the compliance and the need to converge. I think this kind of initiatives would help that move faster, even if it has to coexist. That is going to be that bridge which I mentioned, that has to really be built fast, so that the kind of the belief and the confidence in the Article 6 is going to be much more pronounced as compared to just leaving voluntary alone. That is one way of looking at it. Right. And in terms of too many players, nothing wrong in that, if the purpose is very clear. I heard two whispers in the corridors in the last week that why can't all the registry standards come together, which they did. There was almost 5 major registries came together. Standards again, sorry. The differentiation between standards and registries are now coming up.
Yes.
That's a different subject altogether. The standards coming together, why can't they simply become one? Because our ICVCM is going to more or like going to achieve that. That's a rumor. That's not my view. And therefore, we have a centralized way of looking at it. And that centralized body could have all these guys sitting there and then regulate the voluntary markets, shift or convergent towards a compliance market. That was one whisper I heard. The second part is that in terms of 6.4 adopting all the methodologies in the world, just at one go, right? Of course, we're applying all the tools and the corrections and the rating experience from the rating bodies, because the countries, many big developing countries are saying no to adopt the voluntary standards. Yep. They will not invite them into their country, but they will acknowledge their standards and call their own country standards. Right. 3 examples: India, China, Brazil. At least India said openly, I'm going to call it as Indian carbon standards. And what is that bucket? All the methodologies in the world right now, plus any new methodology that will be unique to my country. So where are we leading? So that answers your question.
You've just opened up a really interesting debate about whether 6.4 will become Suprema. But we've got 2 questions. Ellen over there, and back to you, Pascal. And then we probably will need to draw to a close.
Yeah, so in light of, there's a confusion.
Can you say who you are?
Oh, hi, Angela Foster-Rice, Everland. So we've talked about how it's good that we're going to have less confusion over what's integrity. But I don't know that we're seeing that in the ratings space. We're not seeing the ratings groups come together and start to align. If you look at the ratings at different projects, they're vastly different. And so in line with that aspect of reducing confusion, I'd love to hear what your thinking is, Duncan, on that topic. And then related to that, how do you see the ratings agencies continuing to have relevance after the ICVCM completes their process?
So let's hold that, and then Pascal, can we take your question, and then we'll pick the right people across the panel.
Yeah, thank you. My question was about correction and adjustment, because as we forget that 2 years ago, integrity was as a requirement to have correction adjustment, at least for corporates also, and it's been a bit on the side back because it's not possible today to have correction adjustment. But I'm sure that will come back. We see that it was on the top line for gold standard, for instance, on the plan. And for investors today, it's a big risk, because do you need or not correction adjustment? Is it part of the integrity or not? I mean, the question is not closed. What do you think about that?
Well, I know that VCMI isn't calling for that. So let's take those 2 questions. Duncan, I think let's start with you, because it was a very specific question on ratings agencies.
Yeah, no, thanks for the question, Angela. So indeed, I'm aware that there are projects where the ratings differ. whether they differ vastly or not. I think actually there has been some convergence. But I'd say a couple of things. Number one, ratings in carbon markets is still a relatively young industry, and I think there is still calibration going on. I'm aware that on a few dimensions of quality, the different ratings agencies actually have a different interpretation. I know between us and at least one of our industry peers, colleagues at Almost said, we interpret permanence as something quite different. We take an objective, we think outside-in, objective is a bit of a judgmental word, an outside-in view in terms of saying, hey, permanence, at least 100 years should be a go-to point, and another agency sees that quite different. And one of the things that we are doing is we're watching really closely, we're trying not to be insular, and looking, among other things, at what is being done in the ICVCM, and continuously check whether or not what we are doing is CCP aligned. And actually we've published a bit on that, and you can find it on our website in terms of how we are making sure that what we do is CCP aligned. So I think that somewhat explains what's going on.
On the corresponding adjustment, I would just say that from our perspective, that's not an integrity issue, it's an accounting issue, and definitely not a supply side integrity issue. So yes, you will need to have investors like to have it, or buyers for hedging purposes, or to be able to comply with the compliance markets. You might be putting into the demand side integrity bucket, but it's definitely it's an accounting issue.
Duncan.
Now, I forgot the second piece of your question, Angela, which is you did the relevance of ratings in a CCP world. I'd say the CCPs seek to do something quite different than what ratings do. CCPs are there to provide a floor to the market and look at buckets, categories as they're defined, which could be project types or type methodologies, and don't go into individual project integrity. What distinguishes what we do is we look at specific projects, and we see tremendous variability within those categories or project types. So we have yet to find a project type that is solely A-rated or even AB rated. Now, there are some, admittedly, that do better than others. We have some A to C variances and then C to E variances. But most go all the way from A to D or B to E or even A to E. And that's not something that you'll capture with CCPs. But I'm very hopeful, and I think CCPs will play an important role, that there will be some agreed floor where we'll say, hey, the stuff that doesn't have this isn't what's going to take the market into its next generation.
Either of you waving that, I think now we probably just need to begin to wrap up. Dinesh, I do want to give you a chance to say anything you like against any of those questions, and then
only 30 seconds on the ratings, actually. Mm-hmm. As I mentioned to you before, the definition of ratings 15-20 years ago, when I was experiencing that with Christiana Figueres, it was only the probability of issuance of credits from the project. I'm not sure how much we have evolved from that now. And that's why I said that when you say ratings, it's not just a typical ratings of which you see in other assets. This is completely different. A financing community would look at it in a different angle. Just a carbon procurer would look at it in a different angle. And the country would look at it in a different angle. If they want to really rate a 6.2, I don't know. So it all depends on how you perceive it. If you want to have a combination of understanding, yes, the ratings agency can define at the best what is the common understanding of the ratings that they are providing to the market. So at least the subscriber knows what he is buying, what he is valuing, and what he is inferring into it. So as the Perspectives colleague said, what is social ratings then? Are you incorporating social ratings into the project ratings? So what is the kind of results or outcome are you expecting from the ratings towards making your decision on various aspects would harmonize the way you want to see ratings in this carbon market?
Thank you. And thank you all, all of you, Mark included, for really perceptive insights to that. I'm going to try and summarize in 2 minutes. At one point, I sort of made this comment, sort of a little bit tongue-in-cheek, that channeling Churchill, never in the history of human environmental endeavour has so much attention by so many been focused on a market so small. And one of the things that I feel from this conversation, it feels so different to where we were 2 or 3 years ago. There are many more players in this market, but the response from the market is, bring it on. We are building bottom-up through lessons learned over the last 20 years, an end-to-end integrity framework. It's not yet joined up. It ain't perfect. We're still learning. But there's a sense of that I feel very palpably, that we've gone from being defensive about what we've done in the past to being entirely positive that while this is a market so small, whether it's $2 billion or even whatever the latest figures are, there are mighty expectations for this to really fire up the compliance market. I personally believe there will always be a role for the voluntary carbon market for innovation and to take on corporates or governments that want to go more than compliance. I don't think it's ever going away. It's going to fall away like that ring on a satellite. So I'm very encouraged by everything that we've said here this afternoon. I want to thank you all for your role in playing that, and that leadership and that sense of optimism, which sometimes does get dented. And to thank you as the audience for being here and the questions that you've asked. Thank you so much. And just join me, if you would, in thanking the panel.